Tonight, the siege at the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, the last thing standing between Russia and control of the key port city, now appears to be over because we've got new images coming in showing buses carrying wounded, many of them wounded, servicemen and Ukrainian fighters out of Azovstal and out of Mariupol. The Ukrainian military says the Mariupol defenders have, quote, fulfilled its combat mission. Of course, this means it's all under control of Russia. And it comes as we are learning horrific new details about a Ukrainian man buried alive alongside his two brothers. Melissa Bell is out front tonight in Kyiv.
This is where Mykola Kulichenko was buried alive. The blindfolds he says he and his two brothers were made to wear by Russian soldiers, still strewn by their shallow grave. Mykola shows us where the bullet entered his cheek. His brothers, Yevgen and Dmytro, were killed, but he managed to escape their tomb. I had to live to tell this story, not to Ukrainians, but to the world, he says. The regional prosecutor's office says a war crimes investigation's been opened. This is Mykola's house, where he lived with his two brothers and along with their sister. On March 18th, he says, Russian soldiers came into the village looking for men that they believed were responsible for an attack on one of their convoys. And that is when the family's nightmare began. 3 soldiers entered the house looking for anything that might link the brothers to the attack on the convoy. They found nothing, but what they did find was something to link the family to the military in the shape of their grandfather's military medal. They also found Yevgen's military bag, since as a reservist in the Ukrainian army, he was preparing to go and fight. For 4 days, their sister Irina heard nothing from her brothers, until Mykola came back from the dead. I came home and there was Mykola. I looked at his eyes and asked, where are the others? He said, there are no others. Mykola says that after being taken from their home, the 3 brothers were blindfolded and interrogated in a cellar for 4 days. They were then beaten and taken to the site of their execution. 2 months on, he still struggles to speak. What do I think of the Russians? I hate them with all my soul. They are animals. They should burn in hell. It was only after the Russian withdrawal that a month after their execution, Yevgeny and Dmytro were given a proper burial, a tombstone, and the peace that Mykola's been denied. Aaron, it is in those parts of Ukraine that were occupied by Russian forces for some time that so many of those war crimes are now being investigated. And there is, of course, a sense of relief now in those parts of the country that occupation should be over. Worse news, of course, for Ukrainians, as you mentioned, in the Azovstal steel plant. This was not their preferred outcome. These had been fighters who'd been holding out. It had been a key symbol of their resistance in their fight against Russia. Russia, therefore, confirms its grip over Mariupol. But good news for the families who are immediately involved and will at least be getting their sons and daughters home once they're taken back to those border regions of Donetsk and an exchange can be organized, Aaron.
All right. Thank you very much, Melissa Bell, tonight in Kyiv. And I want to go now to retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, former Army Commanding General for Europe in the 7th Army. So, General, you hear Mykola's story. It is just so horrific what happened. Beaten, blindfolded, bound with his brother, shot, buried alive. He was able to escape. His brothers were not. It's a horrible story. And yet, in a village last week, I hear about torture where people's fingernails were ripped off. I mean, the stories that we're hearing are horrible. Is it possible that we will still hear worse stories involving Russian forces?
Aaron, you can write that down as it will happen. We have seen so many horrific things, so many criminal acts, so many acts of depravity and bestiality and just horrible things that have occurred in this campaign. We're bound to see more. This story about the 2 brothers is just, to me, just despicable.
Mm.
There have been wars where brothers have fought on opposite sides in civil wars. There have been wars. We have cemeteries in the United States where brothers who have fought in wars together are buried side by side. I've never heard anything like this before, where brothers have been tortured together and buried alive together, and then one survives.
Mm.
I can understand this soldier's hatred of the Russian people because just through uh, a second effect, I feel the same hatred. It's just despicable. It's inhuman, and they
Yeah.
should be punished for this.
So, what about what's coming out of Mariupol? I mean, I don't know how many of the deeply wounded survived. You know, talking to some of the families there, um, some of these soldiers were incredibly wounded. They had lost limbs. We don't know how many survived. We do know that the survivors are now coming out, and that is a blessing for their families. We hope that they will survive. However, it does mean that Russia now has full and formal control of Mariupol. That is extremely significant. And I wonder, General, if you could put it in context. I know we hear in places the Russians aren't making the progress they want. They're losing to the Ukrainians. They're not fording rivers. Yet they are now in control of Mariupol, which is a crucial city that gives them Black Sea access and a land bridge to Crimea. How important is it?
Well, I'd push back on your premise a little bit, Aaron, because I don't think they're in full control of it yet. We're talking about 300 or so wounded soldiers, certainly amputee, burn victors,
Yes.
burn victims, gunshot wounds, but there are still fighters in that Azovstal steel plant, and
Yes.
they have held over 12,000 Russian soldiers for a period of 2 months at that site. This is going to be reflective of what the United States did in Pearl Harbor. This will be sort of the thing where Russia will rise, or excuse me, Ukraine will rise like a phoenix from this and say, these were the heroes of our nation that
Yes.
prevented Russian forces to go to the Donetsk and other areas in the Donbass to fight. They prevented that from happening for 2 months. And that is a critical factor in war when you can take forces off the front line of the
Yes.
battlefield and hold them in place to conduct these kind of operations.
And it's incredible, as you point out, with so few to hold off so many as they have been able to do. And those who are doing the holding off, we speak to them. I mean, you know, they're talking about drinking water out of batteries. They're exhausted. They're extremely sick, and yet they still fight. General Hertling, thank you so much, as always.
It's a pleasure, and thank you.
All right. And next, the Pennsylvania Senate race in complete disarray. This is a stunning thing on both sides, Democrat and Republican. Anybody's race on the GOP side. As for the Dems, the frontrunner revealing he just suffered a stroke.
As you can see, we hit a little bump on the campaign trail.
And Congressman Madison Cawthorn, who brought a loaded gun to the airport, claimed congressional colleagues invited him to an orgy, is on the ballot tomorrow. Trump has come in, though, with a last-minute push. Will it save Cawthorn with the voters?